is always going to be a part of existence this side of heaven, whatever your cultural or religious beliefs are. So, as someone who grew up listening to The Cure and to various goth musics and art styles, I thought it would be good for us to go through that. So, and by that I mean look at some of the amazing art and cultural elements and things that make goth great. So, first, I should explain what I mean by that. So, I think many of you would understand kind of off the jump, but um, to define it more, if I can get my internet working here, that's why this is all a work in progress. All right, let's see. Here we go. Let's see if my internet. Yeah. So the goth subculture is a music based movement that emerged in the UK in the late 70s, early 80s, evolved from post punk and punk rock scenes. Okay. It's an appreciation for atmospheric, dark music, art, and literature, as well as a distinct fashion aesthetic. So we could also look at Gothic literature, such as works like Frankenstein and other great literature that delves into human existential life and death concerns that would absolutely be within the wheelhouse of goth culture. So forgive me, I didn't know it was goth day when I left today, and so I'm wearing something rather pedestrian and kind of blah. But as someone who is given to fits of the melancholy thought, as one may say, with my sense of humor, which is rather cynical, my taste in art. I mean, I grew up watching the Batman animated series in the 90s that was considered by many to be the best animated series ever made. So, Batman is a really goth subculture element, especially within that 70s and 80s time. And so, if you look at the evolution of Batman, he starts as this funny, literally comical character in the 30s and 40s, I believe. And um, you look at how he was reclaimed in the 70s, 80s, 90s, right? Really the 80s. If you look at Frank Miller's work on The Dark Knight, like the Dark Knight Returns, you'll see the grittier Batman that we began to have in the late 80s, early 90s. And that's the only one I really knew until I saw reruns of the interesting Batman with, um, the 1960s trappings and Adam West's Batman. Okay. Not my thing, too goofy, not for me. But then again, as a fish, all I know is water, right? Or I'm going to prefer water. And as a kid who grew up with the Batman voiced by Bruce, I want to get his name right, not Bruce. The Batman voice actor of the 90s, uh, known at his name. Let me see. Batman voice actor, 90s cartoon. That's who I grew up with. So Kevin Conroy. So Kevin Conroy was the voice of Batman in the 90s and widely considered the best voice of Batman. So that's who I grew up hearing. He was spectacular. And the Batman origin story is really a good look at the goth subculture and the values we can get from it. So, what do you have? You have early trauma, okay, in the form of Batman losing his parents tragically. And we have intrusive fear of the darkness in life. So the bats that terrorized young Bruce. And then you have him reclaiming the darkness, him wearing it on his back as a symbol, right? So you have Bruce adopting the darkness and becoming a force of justice. Okay. So fascinating turn. And if you look at the goth media in general, you look at The Crow, right? The Crow involves someone who was a romantic lover who lost their spouse and manages to come back from the dead to deal with the unfinished business, to take out the villains, to right the wrongs. So those are two gothic heroes, Batman and the Crow. They're both obsessed with wearing black and showing that they embody dark judgment. And they're not swallowed by it, but they embody it. So I think we can look to goth heroes and say, in life, when we face darkness, when we face bleak outlooks and lessons, do they swallow us, or do we decide to take the truth from them? Do we decide to say, I can move through and adopt the best part of this experience, let it change me to become an avenger, not the Marvel sense, literally, avenger because quite literally in The Crow, the lead character refuses to go into the afterlife. You know, when he's particularly haunted by the unfinished business of his girlfriend being taken from him. So what does he do? His spirit comes back to earth and he one by one takes out the forces that took away his lover. And so there's something about unfinished business this side of eternity with goth media. Okay, so let's talk about music like The Cure and one of my mom's favorite bands, because I'm goth on my mom's side. That's kind of where I get it from. So, and I've always really enjoyed stuff that just gets to the heart of reality and doesn't shy away from it. And as a therapist, you want you want a therapist to be comfortable with talking about trauma and the dark exigencies of life, the dark elements of life. That's something that you need your therapist to be comfortable discussing. And so, if you have a toxic positive therapist who will break when you talk about life sucking, or can't remind you that there is malevolence and that part of life is overcoming it, then you're not going to do well because your happiness is built upon a lie. So, in order to reach the true level of good, in order to reach the ultimate good, you have to travel through despair and through the false sense of good that's built on childishness, that no one will ever die and that you'll never die, right? So that's extremely important to do as someone who cares about truth, is you have to get through naivete, and then you have to enter into cynicism and say, okay, what's the point of anything then? Think the book Ecclesiastes from the Old Testament and the Christian Bible and the Jewish text. So everything is vapor, everything is fleeting. What matters? And so the author of the Old Testament, the author, excuse me, of this book is struggling with finding anything to put trust in, and ends up with it being upon God. Because again, when you look around and you're a critically thinking person, you can see the injustices. You can see that others come bearing values that they don't embody. And the spirit of Goth is a great evaporating. Goth culture is a great disintegration of the illusions. It is seeing truth, and that can be very painful in a world of mirage. To see the truth and its painful glory will unseat you. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It will. And so it's far easier to live in lies, to live in happy lies in Candyland, right? More than Gotham. You don't want to live in Gotham. And whereas you have a character like Scarecrow who succumbs to darkness and says, I will inflict it on others, right? Then you have Batman who says, darkness exists. I am the Dark Knight. But also justice exists, honor, truth. And it isn't always fun. And it isn't the fact that humanity is always motivated by good. People are not always motivated by good. And so Superman does not seem to dabble in that space. Superman is, for all intents and purposes, a titan from another realm. And he's endowed with this sort of Pollyanna nature because he's just happy that he didn't die on a home planet like the rest of his people, except a few of cast of characters here and there. Apparently, his cousin, who gets a movie in a few months, so look forward to that. But Batman grew up in Batman grew up having his parents taken by criminals. And he grew up with the sense that he has money, but money can't buy you the one thing you need, which is loving family and attachment. Aha. Even you could argue romantically, if you buy someone's love, you'll never know if they would have loved you anyway. So it's great tragedy. Batman was forged of a tragedy that so Superman had loving parents, even though his real parents weren't there. Batman was forged of a childhood with a sense of deep duty and his butler there. So Batman is made of sterner stuff. Even though he's human, he's less human appearing than Superman, which is such great comic logic. I love it. It's bitterly characteristic of life sometimes that the deepest the person who's been through the most often appears the coldest and is less human than an alien that had loving human parents. Fascinating to think about. But Batman stands for justice in the face of great compromise, because Gotham is a city where many of the police are corrupt and the criminals are geniuses in many senses, and they often have a point. So Joker has the point that Joker saw too close that things don't make sense, and he decided to be a man of chaos and of to embody that chaos and evil. And Batman decided to be a man of balance and justice who embodies righteousness while acknowledging the nature of evil. And so the theme you'll notice with great Gothic works is pursuing the truth in the face of madness. So if you look at Lovecraftian tales, if you look at that could be also considered cosmic horror, Gothic horror, what have you, facing the truth and not allowing it to destroy you. There's always an element of insanity to cosmic horror because you see too much. You're not meant to see it as a part of nature. And if you see things that mortal beings were not meant to, you will go insane. It's just simply to what extent. So the Batman villains like Harvey Dent are warped by some great tragedy. Now, Joker's origin story changes from book to book and movie to movie. But many of the commonalities is that he was a stand-up comedian who was dragged into crime schemes because he couldn't make any money. And he fell in the vat of chemicals and lost his mind, but retained his humor. So that's fine. There's an element of tragic irony to that, what have you. But we can look to characters like Harley Quinn, who her attachment to someone, to trying to heal a patient, her attachment to care over truth destroyed her objectivity, and it left her a slave to chaos. Okay. So that's important to keep in mind. So the Joker loves nothing more than chaos and proving that people can be broken. So he did that to Harley Quinn, and she became his disciple. So the villain of Two-Face is a man who was of great order and law, and he saw that he wasn't making a difference in his mind enough. It was too much to see the criminals getting away with things. So he had a tragic accident, half his face was scarred. He took to fighting fire with fire. And Two-Face is often seen along with Mr. Freeze as one of Batman's most sympathetic villains, right? So the idea that a villain could be understandable, that they have some great emotional I'm looking here. That the villain has some great tragic flaw, and otherwise they're a great character. I like that. Joker's kind of the exception because he's not considered sympathetic usually. So let's get into the music of the goth scene, because that's what most people would know. I could talk about Batman a lot, and I'm kind of cheating by doing that. So when we talk about The Cure with Robert Smith, things like Love Song, right? Famous 1988 classic. However far away, I'll always love you. However long I stay, I will always love you. It's beauty, okay? Whenever I'm alone with you, you make me feel like I'm home again. Depth, true yearning. Goth music is not afraid of that. It is not afraid of goth music laughs in the face of the, I guess, extraneous. It laughs in the face of surface level frivolity. It revels in depths. It revels in facing the idea of death, loving through death. So Lisa Frankenstein is a great movie, criminally underseen, from a few years ago, where a girl named Lisa Frankenstein revives a deceased young man from the 1800s, and they court, and it's a kind of a gothic horror of a love story. Like, what what is death? Why do we hate it so much? Now, I think that I do need to be very careful, because suicidal ideation is nothing to joke around with. And if someone is experiencing those urges, it's better to not undergo this great winnowing away, this great cutting away, scything, ripping away of illusion. They already have felt that much. And of course, they've gone so far as to say, well, what does matter at all? Nothing really matters at all. So they're at the precipice there, and it's best to focus exclusively on what you have to live for. Okay, so that's very important. So we're not talking about that. Goth therapy is really akin to radical acceptance in the DBT world, radical awareness and driving through it. So goth therapy fights through avoidance. So that's shared across every effective anxiety and trauma treatment. Fear is maintained by avoidance and reduced by repeated tolerable approach to that object you fear. The inhibitory learning model refines this to say the goal is not fear elimination, but the building of new competing safety learning that coexists with the old fear memory. Okay, that's how EMDR therapy works. The clinical cultural element here to keep in mind: dressing in black, elegaic music, cemetery aesthetics, memento mori, reminders of death. These are chronic low dose exposures to mortality and loss cues. So, cues that things can change, all is flux. So, Goth has accumulated inhibitory learning, the Goth culture, that the rest of culture lacks, because the rest of culture avoids fear. It avoids thinking on you too shall one day die. You too are finite. But Goths, it's almost like continual slow bursts of that. So very, very good thoughts here from Goth therapy potentially. So one thing to keep in mind: anxiety is an evolved over-detection system, biased toward false alarms because the cost of missing a real threat once exceeded the cost of many false ones. Okay, that's just evolutionary psychology 101. Death is the threat that the nervous system was ultimately built around, that our nervous system fire alarm was. So a goth approach to therapy would reframe a patient's dread not as malfunction, but as the smoke detector doing its job too loudly. The intervention: not to silence, but to walk the patient toward the idea of death and let them see it, that's for now some distance off. Or, by the way, if you're counseling terminally ill people, helping them make dignity and meaning now and being able to hold that space with them. So, overcoming anxiety, fighting avoidance. So, trauma and unresolved grief, trauma and unresolved grief share a signature. The memory is stuck in a present tense, state dependent form rather than stored as past material. Goth aesthetics ritualize ongoing relationship with the dead and the lost. So, cemetery walks, candles, music that sounds like funeral dirges, elegies. Ritual gives unfinished mourning and grieving a container and a cadence. So, this connects directly to the completion drive at the heart of EMDR therapy, the completion of a thwarted fight, flight, fleeing instinct. Okay. So grief that can't complete as over and then is reconsolidated as a respect for the deceased person, right? And the energy's released. Okay. Grief that cannot do that, that cannot be released, keeps presenting itself repeatedly. Ritual lets it move onward. Okay. So goth therapy would recognize a goth aesthetic intervention or approach to therapy would recognize that you must feel to heal. You must move through the emotional waves and trappings. And sometimes you need outward ritual to do that. As Jung has said, impulses, instincts move through canalization, like canals. And the closer the new symbolic form is to the classic need, the more that need is satisfied. So, dancing as lovemaking, so sports as war, those things can release a need. So, wearing things in the goth subculture that allow you to grieve, that let you to get out your pain, symbolically grieve maybe the loss of your own naivete and the becoming of something new. That's very powerful. That allows you, that is your own ritualistic process, right? So for men, initiation rites, and I've talked about this with Dr. Paul before, initiation rites are important. So are so my big he talks about initiation. I talk about completion. So completion of traumatic impulses. So if you felt like you were trapped and couldn't escape, good therapy is going to bring up that trap feeling and make you aware that in the present you could and you can escape. That's what I've studied since 2015. So goth therapy says, yes, there's great evil and pain. And instead of fighting against that realization of it, I'm going to notice it and I'm going to pivot into noticing all of the visual elements. I'm even going to adopt some of them and wear them. And so that's that energy, the libidinal energy of life, charging those elements, saying, I'm wearing the artifacts of death, of grief, and I am coming out the stronger for it. So I am mourning something and letting it go. Maybe literally, maybe in that Jungian symbolic sense where everything is symbol and everything symbolic and beautiful drives an instinctual human need. So goth therapy addresses that need by embracing a sense of funerary ritual. So if you look at The Crow, you look at Batman again, it's very focused upon embracing that death exists, but that for now you are charged with the power of vitality. So Robert Smith's work with The Cure models the goth therapeutic stance I'm talking about directly. So it does not resolve grief to uplift, it sits inside it with so much fidelity that the sitting within grief becomes bearable. Pictures of You is rumination rendered as art, which is the difference between rumination that traps you and the same content held aesthetically. It's at a workable distance, aesthetically at a workable distance. So, interestingly enough, turning past traumatic memories into something you notice in the present is the grist of the therapy I use the most. EMDR. Stay in contact with the painful material, while a second channel of either eye movement or tapping or what have you keeps you anchored in the present. Interrupted reprocessing. The song itself is the dual attention. So I think Pictures of You is a very good manifestation of goth therapy. So, visiting some of the lyrics. I've been looking so long at these pictures of you that I almost believe that they're real. I've been living so long with my pictures of you that I almost believe that the pictures are all I can feel. Isn't that beautiful? It's just great. Okay. Remembering you standing quiet in the rain as I ran to your heart to be near, and we kissed as the sky fell in, holding you close. So, yes, love it. It is rumination. and it's turning it into something beautiful, turning grief into art, sublimation as defense mechanism. That is the key to goth therapy. Glad I got there after all this. I hadn't taken a note on that actually. That was something that just came to me now. So sublimation into the beautiful. So in the Hannibal television series, one of the, and I have to be careful how I say this, crime scenes are turned into tableaus of art. And I don't obviously condone unaliving people. I hope that goes without saying. But there is this sublimity and art that's made of it that's troublesome because it is something, and I think we can do that in our lives without the criminal element, of course. You can create from grief something beautiful. And all good Gothic literature, television, series, cartoon series, music is creating of trauma, grief, and death something beautiful. And it can be done. It can be done in a life affirming way because we all must deal with grief this side of death. How you do it, whether it's through rumination with no end or rumination that creates an artifact like a song or a journal entry, right? That you have to symbolically bind your pain. So you have to take it to God, you have to take it to art, you have to take it to something to exorcise it. So the magic of EMDR is the magic of emotional exorcism. And it's done very regularly by skilled therapists. And that's why we EMDR elitists will tell the EMDR neophytes, the new disciples, to not fall for the trap of getting derailed from EMDR with talk therapy, because that's like derailing from surgery in order to talk about how the day's going. You don't do that. Continue with the surgery. So, as someone who, I think many goth people find themselves looking at the hypocrisy of the world, at people who espouse certain values and don't live up to them at all. And they think everything is foolishness, everything is vapor, in the words of Ecclesiastes, and they don't move through it. And so, or maybe they do. So let me put it out there. That's their starting point. But then great Gothic individuals like Robert Smith create art and live in this space of positive goth existence. So that's the good path out of cynicism, is to say there is beauty in the living world, and I'm going to create it. And yes, there was great trauma and is great trauma and grief, but to cathart that into a movement of something beautiful, whether it's music, movie, literature, whether you write it, act it, sing it, that is growth. That is what you must do. So for me, I love to get at the real motivations and the truth behind things. And that's a painful process. It will leave you in a serious morose state. And so humor, the art of laughter, absurdist humor, laughing at the absurdity of situations, is a huge balm for the soul. It is, in fact, a mature defense, according to Freud. So who are we to argue? And to Anna Freud, who is a great hero of the therapy, the psychotherapy space. So I'm enjoying this, and on this day of Global Goth Day, I really hope that this has been something useful to everyone. I can't see any comments or things that have been said, but in any event, it might not matter that much, because you can, in fact, send me some notes. You can send me messages wherever you're watching this. So that's the fun part. Please do that. Ask me for thoughts and tips on Goth Day, because I'm a big fan of going into things that people want answers from a therapist upon. So I think we have to say, how do we move on, right? How do we move on with emotional work and recognize the pain of life? So one of the things that I think we have to recognize is you have two ways, young man. So you have, or young woman, anyone, you can allow yourself to be consumed by naive surface level culture that is going to say you're perfect all the time and you will never be you are never the problem. You just need a new person to fill your emptiness. And you can also lapse into self hatred. And you can look at the middle way, though. The middle way is some people are bad, sometimes you're bad, but you can meet other people who care about righteousness and about um, they care about personal growth. So for goths, I would wager that their value system values truth and beauty above many things. So goth art can also act as a personal exorcism that others dial into on that frequency of healing and cathart and exercise it. So look at Hurt by Trent Reznor from Nine Inch Nails, which I'm a big fan. I mean, I've listened to Nine Inch Nails since I was a teenager. And as a therapist, I think it's useful to have a taste for music that has off-putting and authentic lyrics. Authenticity is the first step of healing. I don't care if that goes against awareness, whatever it is, as the first. Acknowledging you have a problem is the first step. That is the verbal manifestation of authenticity. The internal authenticity to say, I have a problem, comes first. Mark it down. So, Hurt as a song is a clinical artifact. It names dissociative numbing. I focus on the pain and the desperate use of physical sensation to confirm one is still alive. So, dissociation steps in, someone focuses on pain to feel that they are still living and breathing. Now, that's a behavioral pattern familiar to any of us therapists who've worked with self-harm, right? Self-harming is a way to feel alive. Johnny Cash cover is a therapeutic counterpoint. So the same lyrics are sung from the far side of a life, demonstrating that the meaning of pain is not fixed at the moment of its encoding, but it can be reprocessed in light of everything that came after the pain, okay? Played side by side, the Reznor and Johnny Cash recordings are a teaching tool for memory reconsolidation. Okay, so let's talk about it. This idea of reconsolidating a painful memory, okay, this is the painful memory, putting it in its place as something that happened and is over. That's what I'm talking about. So mortality salience, awareness of mortality. That's what we talked about earlier. It'd be good to get some questions, but I can't see them. Approach avoidance. We talked about that. Getting rid of that avoidance. Okay. Terror management research establishes that reminders of death reliably shift behavior, and the relationship between mortality awareness or salience and well-being is not simply negative. Under certain conditions, death reminders increase intrinsic goal pursuit, gratitude, and prosociality rather than defensive rigidity. Now, prosociality is simply the opposite. Prosociality is the opposite of antisociality or antisocial behavior. Existential clinical theory said the same thing first, though, before. Confrontation with finitude or being finite can be a precondition for authentic living rather than a threat to it. So don't be a normie. Being a normie means that you're plugged into the matrix of pleasure all day, every day, either into porn or making thirst traps, sports only, right? And watching them, not playing them. Sports gambling, video games, that's all. Don't be plugged into just that. Face life in its gory glory. Come out the other side. Okay. The clinical cultural element here. Goth culture is a standing terror management theory manipulation that goths administer to themselves like a self-administered shot voluntarily and repeatedly. And that means that they remind themselves this too shall pass. Stuff sucks. Okay. And the better outcomes among integrated members are what the growth branch of the terror management theory research would predict. Okay, cool, sure. Meaning centered work with people facing death directly produces measurable reductions in despair and hopelessness. Nice. That's from a 2015 study. Ecclesiastes as a book is the preclinical template. Name the vapor, the meaninglessness in life. Refuse false consolation. Return to your meaningful values and relationships. Okay. Bookmark that. This is the same arc as behavioral activation therapy, and it's layered onto existential acceptance. Boom. Okay. Activate your own behaviors of positive pro social seeking, and then your emotions will follow. Okay. And I'm giving you the existential terminology for it too. Goth does not resolve darkness into uplift. And that's precisely why it works as a meaningful practice. It models meaning that does not require denial. It says, this stuff sucks, and I'm living in spite of it. Okay. So, yeah, I like all that. Let's see. I think that's what I have. I mean, I think I'm going to keep this to that length, and I really appreciate everybody for being here. And I'm going to turn this into a longer form thing. Obviously, it stays on X, but I'm going to do something else here with it, chop it up, turn it into something a little more orderly. So appreciate all of you. Thank you.